the incoming President Donald Trump was holding that press conference at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. It's his second news conference since winning the election, and fair to say, as Gary suggests, the headlines from it will be perhaps ringing alarm bells in many foreign capitals. Mr. Trump refused to rule out using military force to retake the Panama Canal. He said he would tariff Denmark at a very high level if it does not give Greenland to the United States. He suggested renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and he said he would use economic force to make Canada the 51st state of America.
Panama Canal is a disgrace, what took place at the Panama Canal. Jimmy Carter gave it to them for $1, and they were supposed to treat us well. I thought it was a terrible thing to do. If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time.
Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No. Economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. But why are we supporting a country, $200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state. That's why I told Trudeau, I hope to have 6 months.
First 3 to 6 months.
No, I hope long before 6 months. Look, Russia's losing a lot of young people, and so is Ukraine.
Gary, we are often told not to take everything Donald Trump says literally, but I would suggest Denmark takes it very seriously. The Danish king has just made Greenland a much bigger part of the coat of arms. And we've had a quote from Justin Trudeau, the outgoing Canadian Prime Minister, who says there isn't a snowball's chance in hell Canada will become the 51st state of the United States. So there clearly is alarm bells ringing in foreign capitals after today's press conference.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying, I mean, there's a couple of things I think that are important to note here. Look, Donald Trump will be the President of the United States in 13 days' time. That makes anything he says news. Anything he says is important. It's also worth saying, I think, that one of the things we know from his first term, and indeed the years after that, is that sometimes there is some posturing. Sometimes you might even describe that as sort of negotiation out loud, megaphone diplomacy, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't come to anything. Sometimes it does come to something. So I think the context is important, but we cannot be sure, I don't think, how serious he is about some of these things. He's clearly serious about things like NATO, because that's been very consistent, and he did get some concessions from NATO over the years. Whether he really means that Canada should be the 51st state, I just don't know, and I don't think anyone knows. And I'd be amazed even if anyone in his inner circle really knows the answer to that. So these things, I think we have to take them seriously, but we also have to remember that this is a very, very sophisticated and effective way of sucking up the oxygen of publicity, the news cycle, of dominating free media in this country and around the world. And as you say, keeping lots and lots of diplomats, lots and lots of heads of government in lots and lots of capitals around the globe on their toes.
Ambassador, Gary questions how we should characterise it at this moment and the style in which he delivers it. A Ukrainian colleague in the office this afternoon remarked that when he refers in this way to Canada and Greenland as crucial to our security, and we have friends there, but we should all be one country, he sounds a lot like Vladimir Putin. It's the same imperial language.
That is very interesting, and the antithesis of President Carter. He made the decision to give back the Panama Canal because it was costing the United States a lot, and it was controversial. It was not an inexpensive entity to maintain, and it belonged to Canada. So suggesting that it would be taken back or suggesting that force would be used would bring all of that back. And while taking him seriously, many American presidents, as well as diplomats, leaders around the world, understand that what you personally want or want to have happen does not necessarily happen. It doesn't matter just because the president of the United States.
Except that he negotiates in a zero-sum fashion, and what he's talking about is using economic force. He's talking about significant tariffs on Denmark, significant tariffs, economic force in dealing with an ally like Canada. That is very different to the incumbent of the Oval Office talking about what he would like.
That's true, but we also know that what he has said today may be 180 degrees different than what he says tomorrow. And he's not yet president. Once he gets back in the office, gets the full briefings, presumably it'll be tempered, but he's not consistent. No one will accuse him of that. And he's not yet president. So we will listen and we will see what he does when he gets into office. But again, the comparison to President Carter, it couldn't be more night and day, and we'll see whether his way is more successful.
That's a good place to bring you in, Laura, as a historian. I'm not sure whether there needed to be a press conference today. At the moment, they were paying respects to Jimmy Carter, but there we are. The juxtaposition of it, how did you see it, the style that you get from Donald Trump versus the diplomat that Jimmy Carter always was?
They are polar opposites, but it's interesting because obviously Reagan, who defeated Carter, made him that one-term president, was the one who coined the phrase, make America great again. But he used it in the sense of optimism, not xenophobia, not, I'm talking about anti-immigration. So it's opposite in terms of policy, but there are some sort of similarities. And Reagan was the oldest president at the time. So there are interesting things in terms of age, in terms of how he approached briefings. Reagan was very much keen on not really focusing on the detail of policies. So it's very, very sort of similar in that respect, but very different in the policies that they do land on and the style of communication. So for Carter, it's absolutely polar opposite. For Reagan, we see some similarities, but we also see the fact that this is definitely now Donald Trump's Republican Party.
I mean, when you talk about juxtapositions, Gary, you could hardly have two different characters than Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump. I think Jimmy Carter said the most extraordinary thing that happened to him growing up in the 1930s was that the house where he was raised got electricity. They didn't have running water. I mean, his life in some respects was 19th century America when he was a teenager.
Absolutely right. And ironically, of course, Donald Trump railing against electricity today in his press conference, in one of those kind of moments where he riffs, talking about how gas fires are much better than electric fires and they look nicer and all that kind of stuff that we got used to in his first term. One of the things I think is different this time around, Christian, is that if you remember at the beginning of Donald Trump's first term, he had people like James Mattis in the Pentagon, he had people like Reg Tillerson in the State Department. He had people here in Congress who were sort of stopping him doing some stuff. Not all stuff, but stopping him doing some stuff. This time it's very different. There's not going to be a Jeff Sessions launching, as the Attorney General, launching a Russia probe, the Mueller investigation. The Defense Department's not going to stand in the way of what he says on this day or that. State Department the same. So the dynamics are going to be very different. Now, of course, there are still the courts, and there is plenty of money sloshing around in America that's opposed to Donald Trump that will try and use the courts to stop him doing things. But there won't be that sort of political internal opposition. And as your guest was saying, he's won some of these big arguments. The Republican Party that was the free trade party, the party of free global trade, is now a protectionist party. And that is his doing because he has reshaped it in his image.